The president says he doesn't want any Somalis living in the U.S. after a few dozen were implicated in a COVID relief.
Today, the Drug Enforcement Administration is launching a major campaign to combat drug abuse on college campuses statewide.
The encrypted drive cracked at 3:14 in the morning. The first file wasn't a ledger. It wasn't a narcotics manifest. It was a photograph. A man in a Harvard faculty blazer, ID badge clearly visible, standing shoulder to shoulder with the confirmed logistics chief of the East Coast Shadow Cartel at what appeared to be a private academic gala in Boston's Back Bay. The FBI analyst stared at the screen for 11 full seconds without speaking. Then she picked up the phone. "Sir," she said quietly, "you need to come in. Right now." That photograph collapsed 16 months of federal investigation and tore open something far worse. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to February 11th.
The most effective drug-seizing teams in the entire country. I said I wish I told them earlier, take them and put them in every major city in the country.
11:47 p.m. Cambridge, Massachusetts. 3 blocks from Harvard Yard. In a townhouse with a faculty parking permit in the driveway and a recycling bin sorted with academic precision. Federal surveillance teams had been watching for 6 consecutive weeks. From the outside, it looked exactly like every other home on the block. University mail, faculty vehicles, a modest, intelligent life built around research. But inside that house, according to this investigation, something far more dangerous was being run. Tonight, FBI, D, and ICE were converging on Boston and Cambridge in a takedown that would become the most extraordinary drug network operation in New England history. $19.7 million in narcotics, laundered funds, and cartel-linked assets. A supply chain stretching from East Boston to Providence to New York. And at the center of it, Dr. Abdikadir Hassan, a Harvard-affiliated biomedical researcher. 14 published academic papers. Federal grant access clearance. But here's what nobody in the academic community knew that night. And here are the 4 questions this story needs you to hold. Who was Meridian? The name on an encrypted burner phone registered to someone who didn't legally exist. What did a perfectly formatted NE grant application have to do with a cartel routing system? And who, inside federal oversight, had been quietly protecting this network for 4 straight years? Keep watching, because the answers will change how you see this kind of power. 12:04 a.m. 4 locations. Simultaneously. In Cambridge, a joint FBI ICE unit moved on the Hassan residence with precision. No flashbangs, no theater. This was an evidence preservation entry. The front door came down in 7 seconds. Dr. Hassan was found at his desk. His wife, Fadumo, was seated 2 rooms away with 2 laptops open, both connected to an offshore encrypted cloud server. At a storage facility in East Boston, DIA agents hit what the warrant described as the primary distribution node. Inside, 38 kilograms of cocaine, 740,000 fentanyl pills pressed to look like pharmaceutical medication, and $2.3 million in vacuum-sealed cash, organized by denomination. Military-grade rifles, body armor bearing no serial markings. Simultaneously, ICE strike teams breached a transit house in Roxbury, the kind of nondescript address used to stage narcotics before last-mile delivery. 4 cartel-linked couriers were arrested mid-operation. They were not expecting anyone. And 3 miles away in a leased research annex near Kendall Square, the kind of anonymous office suite that disappears into Cambridge's biotech corridor, FBI cyber units discovered 11 servers running around the clock. Not for biomedical research, for financial routing. The first analyst to breach the primary partition stared at the account architecture and said, paraphrasing the source, "This isn't a drug operation. This is a bank." 47 shell companies. Ghost accounts layered through academic-adjacent LLCs. Consulting invoices billed to real university contractors. The East Coast Shadow Cartel hadn't just recruited a financial operative. They had found someone who understood exactly how institutional money moved, and built a laundering system that looked, on paper, like a peer-reviewed research budget. But what was on the other servers? That's where this stopped being a drug case, and became something federal prosecutors would later call unprecedented in academic-adjacent criminal networks. If you think this is big, stay with me. What comes next is darker. 6 hours later, FBI Cyber Command Field Unit, Federal Plaza, Boston. Operation Phantom Ledger. That was the code name. Analysts had been running military-grade decryption sequences through the night. By 7 a.m., they had enough to brief the special agent in charge. The cartel called it the academic corridor. Here's how it worked. Drug revenue entered through street-level distribution across 4 East Coast cities. That cash was fractured into small amounts and funneled through a network of consulting firms, all registered with legitimate addresses, several adjacent to university campuses. Those firms issued invoices to shell entities purportedly receiving fees for biomedical data analysis contracts. The invoices were processed, the money laundered. The funds re-entered the financial system as clean research capital. It was elegant, it was nearly invisible, and it had been running for 4 years without triggering a single compliance alert. One 14-year FBI veteran pushed back from his workstation and said nothing for close to 2 minutes. Then, I've spent a career tracking cartel finance. This is the first time I've seen a network that weaponized academic credibility as a structural defense mechanism. Then came the first answer. Meridian, the name on the ghost phone, was a logistics coordinator for the East Coast Shadow Cartel. Not a street-level operator, a financial translator. Someone fluent in both narcotics logistics and institutional accounting systems. But that answer immediately triggered the larger question. If Hassan built the architecture, and Meridian was the cartel's operational bridge, who was running interference at the federal oversight level? Who had kept the curtain drawn for 4 years? Pause. Think about who that person might be. Because the answer arrives in 60 seconds. 5:38 a.m. Joint Task Force Command, Boston. 31 red markers pulsed across a digital map covering Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. This had graduated from a Cambridge drug case to a regional cartel infrastructure takedown. 800 federal agents, 22 SWAT teams, DIA tactical units across 3 states, ice strike forces, 14 Blackhawk helicopters on standby. By 9 a.m., 6.7 tons of narcotics seized, $19.7 million in cash and laundered assets recovered, 183 arrests, 61 firearms, 9 armored vehicles, and 22 trafficking victims recovered from a parallel transit network that had been invisible until that morning. Inside a Providence warehouse, a secondary meth distribution hub processing 200 kilograms weekly, hidden inside commercial cleaning supply shipments, hiding in plain sight, moving through standard freight infrastructure. By every visible metric, the operation was a complete success. And then, at 11:47 a.m., the final server partition opened. The file wasn't financial records, it was correspondence. Encrypted, time-stamped communications between Dr. Hassan and a contact identified only as counselor, a federal official sitting on a regulatory board with direct authority to flag, delay, or quietly suppress financial compliance audits of university-affiliated research entities. For 4 years, Counselor had filed bureaucratic delay notices pending grant reclassification review every single time an audit window opened that might have flagged Hassan's shell network. Filed 11 times. 11 successful blocks, not one audit completed. This is where I need you to focus. Because this is where it stops being about drugs and starts being about something systemic. The seized communications revealed something chilling in its precision. The protection network extended beyond Counselor, 4 state-level compliance officers, 6 freight logistics operators across 3 states, 2 university administrative figures, all on disguised retainer payments, all listed in a single spreadsheet, formatted like an academic attendance log. Under one column header, active. 41 names. 41 people whose collective function was to make a $19.7 million narcotics laundering operation look like a university research budget. A ICE special agent reviewing the document said in a task force debrief, this wasn't infiltration. This was architecture. Someone designed a system where every oversight mechanism had a human override already installed. And then, the second open loop closed. The NE-formatted grant application with the cartel routing number buried in the footnotes? It wasn't funding research. It was a proof of concept, submitted to Counselor as a test. Could cartel financial data pass federal formatting review? It did. That passing grade was the green light that launched the academic corridor into full operation. The question now wasn't whether the network had been stopped. It was how many other corridors existed. Boston Federal Courthouse. Dr. Abdikadir Hassan was formally charged with narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to obstruct federal financial oversight. Counselor was arrested at a home in suburban Virginia at 6 a.m. 183 individuals in custody. The network publicly declared dismantled. For 4 days, it appeared justice had been fully and completely served. Then the FBI's Financial Intelligence Unit completed its comparative analysis. The Boston model, the shell layering, the institutional camouflage, the regulatory override architecture had not been invented in Cambridge. It had been deployed there. As city number 5, the analysis identified 4 additional cities, all active, all operational, all currently undetected, using identical architecture, same invoice formatting, same compliance delay language, same structural blueprint, run by different operators, connected to different cartel-linked networks. Someone had designed this system and licensed it, not to one cartel, to multiple. And that architect, the single unknown individual who engineered a replicable corruption model for academic adjacent narcotics laundering, had never appeared in a single one of Hassan's files. They didn't just build the corridor. They built the company that builds corridors. And they are still building. 2 weeks after the arrests, a woman stood outside the federal courthouse in Boston. In this fictional account, her name was Patricia Moreno. She was holding a photograph of her son, 19 years old, a community college student from Dorchester, dead 14 months earlier from a fentanyl pill that prosecutors traced directly to the East Coast Shadow Cartel's distribution network. The same network that had been operational, protected, and financially invisible for 4 years before anyone stopped it. She didn't speak to reporters. She didn't need to. In Massachusetts alone, 2,800 overdose deaths recorded in the previous year. Investigators believe 58% of the fentanyl involved moved through networks architecturally identical to this one. 89 trafficking victims were recovered in this operation. More than 150 remain unaccounted for. This is not an abstract story about encrypted servers and shell companies. This is what it costs, in real human weight. When power and silence agree to look the other way. It happened here. It is happening elsewhere. And corruption doesn't always arrive carrying a weapon. Sometimes it arrives carrying a faculty badge and a federal grant application. If you made it this far, you're seeing something most people scroll past. Tap like so this story reaches people who need to hear it. Comment expose if you believe these kinds of networks deserve full public scrutiny. Share this with someone who thinks corruption only lives in obvious places. Because the most dangerous systems are the ones that look completely professionally legitimate. And as for the architect, the person who designed the blueprint now running in 5 cities, we found a city. Same method, different network, different coast. And this time, the cartel isn't using a university. That story drops Friday. Subscribe. You will not want to miss where this goes next.
गुजरे यो अर्ज कर दी मेरी सुनी तू अज फरियाद अल्लाह दस दीद महबूब प्यार रेदा बर्बाद नू करी तू बेशाद सच्ची ढूंढ वाला माई रह खाली पे हक सच तेरा इरशाद अल्लाह मोस पाक महबूब प्यार रेदी है दिलशानू पे जिंदाद अल्लाह तुद में मलकल मौत पे जीते जदू तीर दा देर दीदार रब्बा होश पाक दा होवे दीदार हाज़र जदू मौत दी चाड़ से ओ मार रब्बा पाक महबूब दे आज उस दम मैनू कुछ नहीं और दरकार रब्बा है दरशादा करी में सवाल पूरा दिन रात दी आल पुकार रब्बा से स्वागती दे महबूब तेरा मैनू और ना किसे दी दे लोड़ साई दे